So I'm going to read to you the Ching and Philip K. Dick's The Man in the Castle, a paper from Science Fiction Studies 2016 by Paul Mountfort, Auckland University of Technology. Okay, I'm going to leave out the abstract. Let's go to the beginning of the text. It starts with the quote by Philip K. Dick on the I Ching. I've used it to develop the direction of a novel. So it's a coincidental, but more like a synchronistic direction of the novel. The Hugo Award-winning classic The Man in the Castle, 1962, is a widely regarded as Philip K. Dick's breakthrough novel, and it remains among his most critically acclaimed. Its central premise has also proved to have longevity in popular culture. The pilot for the 2015 television adaptation was Amazon's most watched program ever. The novel's central plot device is the main character's periodic use of the Chinese oracle or divination text known as the I Ching or Book of Changes. Dick appears to have consulted the oracle more or less obsessively to aid him in developing the direction of High Castle, setting up a powerful metafictional dynamic between the author and his protagonists. Despite widespread acknowledgement of this compositional technique and frequent mention of the role of the I Ching in the construction of High Castle, however, there has been little detailed analysis of it as a structure or patterning device in the novel. While critics have praised High Castle as a landmark example of the uchronie or alternate history genre, they have failed to perceive how deeply the text's hidden symmetries were inspired by Dick's use of the I Ching. The cornerstone study in this area, Paul Williams's essay The Author and the Oracle, 1990, while valuable as the only systemic consideration of the oracular consultations that punctuate the story, was published over 2 decades ago, is hard to locate and, in my view, seriously underestimates the I Ching's significant contributions to the novel, describing these as not extensive. My analysis of High Castle focuses on the oracle's contribution to its conceptual design, which marks the book, in my estimation, as a particularly major text in modern literature. Despite the existence of some novels and poetry that engage oracle texts, chiefly the tarot, Dick's effort along these lines was stylistically the most experimental of its period. The I Ching also provided a philosophical foundation for the novel in the synchronistic notion of simultaneity or meaningful coincidence that is contrary to classical Western views of causality, going beyond even the synchronic notion of time advanced by Frederick Jameson in Archaeologies of the Future, 2005. The I Ching, I argue, is the device that literally and figuratively unifies the stylistic and philosophical dimensions of the novel, leaving us with a sophisticated postmodern fiction that explores the boundaries of text and world, their overlappings and multiplicities. Thus, despite critical discontent, including Dick's own, over its ambiguous denouement, I argue that this multiverse of possible interpretations is precisely what is central to the novel's ongoing currency. Umberto Rossi notes of High Castle that few novels by Dick have been read so many different ways, supporting this contention by means of a convenient summary of some of the major critical approaches. Many scholarly analyses have focused on the novel as an allo historical work or as a formative example of alternative history, though a more useful term is the French uchronie, which emphasizes less a causal or a diachronic notion of history and more a synchronic or polyphonous one. In Archaeologies of the Future, Frederick Jameson places High Castle within a great discussion of late capitalist utopian dystopian desire. Justin Everett and Paul Halpern consider High Castle as a multicursal labyrinth that corresponds with the many worlds interpretation of quantum physics. This ties in with the use of the oracle, because the reliance on the I Ching introduces an element of chance. It suggests that alternative possibilities always exist, perhaps in different realities where other hexagrams were cast. Yet, while there is frequent discussion of the formative role of the I Ching, its repeated cameos in the text, and its compositional deployment, there has been little in the way of a systematic close reading that reveals how central the oracle is to the novel's intricate internal design, what I term its core patterning, and how this meshes more or less seamlessly with its central philosophical preoccupations. As mentioned, Paul Williams provides a useful analysis of key oracular consultations nested within the text, as well as an engaging discussion, informed by his acquaintance with Dick and his archives, of some attendant implications. His view that most of the novel's plot does not derive directly from I Ching readings and conclusion that the I Ching participated in the novel only at those moments when the characters actually consult the oracle in the course of the story. However, glosses over the central role played by the ancient Chinese divination text as an organizational device, and thus the extent to which it underpins and permeates the fabric of the novel as a whole. Emmanuel Carrière, also informed by first-hand knowledge of Dick and his milieu, devotes a chapter to the author's use of the oracle in composing High Castle in his fictive study I Am Alive and You Are Dead, originally published in French in 1993. While his reconstruction of Dick's state of mind and authorial practices is stimulating, it remains largely speculative, and he offers no sustained analysis of the core consultations or of how such a literary device might relate to wider literary and literary theoretical concerns. There are also limitations to previous discussions of philosophical aspects of High Castle that intermesh with Dick's deployment of the I Ching. Laura Campbell, for example, provides a valuable mediation on the interlacing of both linear and synchronistic time in the novel, and on how plot lines are interrupted now and then by assessments through consulting the I Ching of all that is bound together to make the moment, while Jake Jakaitis discusses the degree of Dick's actual familiarity with Taoism and Eastern philosophy more generally, and how this conditions his construction of Asian identity. In both cases, however, consideration of the I Ching's hexagram is either absent or overly generalized, and there is little or no close analysis of the actual oracular consultations that crucially punctuate the text. Over half a century after High Castle's publication, a case has yet to be made that the I Ching resides at the intersection of the stylistic and philosophical dimensions of the novel, and is central to the interpretation of this complex classic. In terms of the boldness of Dick's conception, it is true that use of the I Ching was well established in the San Francisco Bay Area counterculture by the late 1950s, placing Dick at the tail end of the avant garde, as Carrère puts it. While in continental literature, Hermann Hesse's The Glass Bead Game was modeled partly on the Chinese oracle. By the way, my Twitter name is also called Glass Bead Player, alluding to the Glass Bead Game from 1943, which got the Nobel Prize in Literature. It is also true that more generally use of an oracle text as a fictional motive was not unique to Dick. The tarot, a deck of 78 cards commonly used in fortune telling, whose symbols have entered the lexicon of popular culture, e.g., the Fool, the Hanged Man, Death, etc., had been extensively mined in early to mid 20th century poetry and fiction. T.S. Eliot famously drew on its symbolism in The Wasteland 1922, as did W.B. Yeats in The Tower 1928, while it also figured in Charles Williams's supernatural thriller The Greater Trumps 1932 and Malcolm Lowry's Under the Volcano 1947. This trend of using or referencing the tarot would continue in the second half of the 20th century in poetry, prose, and a diverse range of media from cinema to sculpture. There is little doubt, however, that Dick was the first to use an oracle text in such a central, sophisticated, and self reflexive way. Plotting a novel with the I Ching remained boldly experimental for an American writer working in any genre in 1962. In the next section, I briefly consider the distinguishing features of the Book of Changes as an oracle text in order to provide a working terminology for the following section, which consists of close readings of the 12 I Ching consultations around which High Castle is organized. My goal here is to highlight what Dick was doing on a technical level in the construction of the novel. This is followed by sections that discuss some key implications, including the synchronistic view of time the I Ching confers on the work, making it a standout text in the Uchronie genre. I conclude with an analysis of how we might read the conversational denouement of Dick's otherwise highly celebrated novel. The Book of Changes. The I Ching has over 3,000 years of documented history, at least in terms of its composite parts, and has occupied a primary place in Chinese culture for much of that time. So, discussion of it here is necessarily truncated. It has been argued that its 64 core hexagrams, its chapters, evolved out of oracle bone, tortoise shell divinatory signs that, along with associated written commentaries derived from oral lore, cohered as texts corpus in the earlier part of the Zhou dynasty, 1100 to 400 BCE. Before Christ. Thus, the book is sometimes described as the Zhou-Yi, classic of the Zhou dynasty, while the main function of the oracle in Zhou dynasty was diagnosing action to be taken in affairs of state, and diviners were a professional class of officiate priests. A more personalized use of the oracle flourished in the Warring States period, 500 to 200 BCE, following explication of its use for purposes of self-cultivation in the foremost Neo-Confucian exposition on the I Ching, the Ta Chuang, Great Treatise of c. 500 BCE. By the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE, it's now after Christ, the E, as it is also known, was canonized as a formal classic, one of the few to escape the infamous burning of the books constituted by Qin Xing Huangti in 213 BC. A review of its influence in the intervening centuries would be compendious. An imperial bibliography commissioned in 1692 CE lists over 2,000 titles on the I Ching. And while it has largely dropped from the view in China since the Cultural Revolution, the so-called Book of Changes has enjoyed considerable popularity in the West since the famous Richard Wilhelm translation of 1927. The first European language iteration explicitly amenable to oracular consultation. Cary Baines's English translation from the German was completed in 1949 and published in 1950 by Bollingen, making the text accessible to the Anglophone world. Since then, there has been dozens of translations and adaptations with an ever-widening audience. When a questioner consults the I Ching, he or she will receive one of its 64 hexagram 6-line graphs generated according to a randomizing mechanism, traditionally the manipulation of yarrow stalks, and later the so-called coin oracle method of tossing 3 coins 6 times. In any given consultation, the questioner may receive from 1 to 6 changing lines. These changing lines, which carry staccato divinatory verses of an oracular nature, are read as supplementary commentaries to the general text associated with the hexagram, and also transform the original hexagram into a secondary one that represents the likely outcome of the situation. If there are no changing lines and thus no secondary hexagram, the situation is said to be static, with no change in the foreseeable future. According to the Ta Chuang, which Dick had clearly read, the Book of Changes is a living document, a microcosm that encompasses the universe and its macrocosmic cycles. Quote, because of its vastness and greatness, it corresponds with heaven and earth. Because of its changes and its continuity, it corresponds with the 4 seasons. Because of the meaning of the light and the dark, it corresponds with the sun and the moon. Because of the good in the easy and the simple, it corresponds with the supreme power. From I Ching. Contained within those macro cycles, allegedly, are all the tropes of human history. The oracle's predictive ability lies in the fact that through divination, the user will receive a particular result from this codex of situations that is in harmony with the time, that is, one which accords with the user's circumstances. The work is therefore clearly based on a cyclical rather than linear notion of time, in that archetypes of key formative events or situations are seen to repeat themselves throughout recurrent patterns of change. While the I Ching often inclines towards the poetic, obscure, and fragmentary, its various historical iterations presumably were intended to be more or less self-explanatory or to contemporaneous audiences. The historical precedents in the book provided advice for the questioner on how to act in the here and now. As Michael Strickman comments, some oracle sequences are shot through with allusions to characters and situations in historical tales, novels, and plays. They tacitly invite the person in quest of divine guidance to place himself or herself in the role of the historical or legendary exemplar and act accordingly. The solution to all one's problems is found in a well-known precedent. Even as such a one long ago got out of his scrape, so now may you. Thus, the view of history and time implicit in the I Ching is not only cyclical and but synchronistic. Basic tropes repeat throughout history from the micro to the macro level, and furthermore, simultaneities can be provoked by the chance throw of yarrow sticks or coins to produce an oracle that reflects the situation of the questioner. Readings. In this section, I examine the 12 oracular consultations that take place or are referenced in the novel and consider how collectively they reveal a kind of deep structure or patterning device nested in the text. The alternate history on which High Castle is based stems from the familiar Nexus event, also known as Jumbar Hinge, of the Axis powers winning World War II. The Germans and Japanese go on to divide the continental US between them. Many of the inhabitants of the Japanese occupied West Coast, called PSA, Pacific States of America, are avid I Ching users, perhaps incongruously given its Chinese origins and the status of virtual slavery to which the Chings in the novel are reduced. Three main characters consult the oracle more than once, with its responses spliced into the complex six-track narrative that is told variously from the points of view of Robert Childan, Frank Frink, Nobusuke Tagumi, Mr. Baines, Juliana Frink, and more peripherally the Nazi Hugo Rice. These oracles were obtained when Dick himself posed the I Ching questions at various critical junctures in his writing process regarding what would happen next to his characters, how they should act, and consequently how the plotting of the novel should proceed. Quote, I used the I Ching in the Man the Castle because a number of characters used it. In each case, when they asked the question, I threw the coins and wrote the hexagram lines they got. That governed the direction of the book. Like in the end, when Juliana Frink is decided whether or not to tell Hawthorne Abenson, that's the man in the castle, that he is target of assassins. The answer indicated that she should. Now, if it had said not to tell him, I would have had her not go there. The resulting 12 reported I Ching results illuminate the central concerns of Dick's protagonists and also the subterranean fate lines that connect characters who never meet but whose actions affect each other in concrete ways, somewhat like the composite strands of a Robert Altman movie. Further, just as Dick's characters turn to the oracle for guidance on how to act, so Dick, in writing the novel, applied its advice to his developing narrative. Consequently, Dick regarded the I Ching itself as having, in a sense, written High Castle, although he was never entirely satisfied with the result, points to which I will return. A logical objection at this juncture would be to question the extent to which Dick may have been selective in his utilization of I Ching results, despite his protestations that had the oracle not given a particular nudge in a certain narrative direction, he would not have had the characters act as they do. Patricia Warwick appears to accept at face value Dick's statement that he used the I Ching as a plotting device in High Castle. Even Williams makes the claim that it is certainly to Phil's credit that he was willing to stick with the readings he got rather than try to second guess them by imposing his own ideas of what the oracle should have said. Such a critical posture should give us pause for thought. After all, the wife of the fictional novelist within the novel Hawthorne Abenson, who used the I Ching in a way that metafictionally mirrors Dick's own, reveals how. One by one, Hoth made the choices, thousands of them, by means of the lines. How many alternative results did Dick reject if he made similar choices when composing High Castle? Moreover, Carrera alleges limitations to the oracle's role in determining the direction of the narrative. Phil didn't need the I Ching to help him come up with the exact structure for his novel, he maintained, but it did lead him to see better the organization he was already struggling to build by helping him understand the importance of structure. Even with these provisos in mind, my analysis suggests that the oracular consultations that appear at critical junctures in the novel, which seem to the uninitiated to be little more than a picturesque, if prominent, subtext to its various storylines, in fact reveal the physical seams of the novel's construction, constitute its central organizational device, and set up a kind of metafictional dialectic between author and protagonists that carries over to the relationship between the reader and text. Table 1.0 below summarizes the readings that comprise this deep structure of patterning. It differs from Williams's listing of the novel's oracular consultations in the inclusion of an additional consultation that is cryptically mentioned by character Robert Childen. I argue that while not named, this hexagram can be conclusively identified through textual and contextual evidence. There are 12 I Ching consultations. The first was 15 modesty, then 44 coming to meet, then 28 preponderance of the great, 46 pushing upward, 11 peace, 47 oppression, again 47 oppression, and 40 deliverance, then 47 oppression, 51 the arousing, 42 increase, and 43 breakthrough or resolution, 61 inner truth. And that's the thing, the quintessential result of the High Castle, that the inner truth, the inner vision, your inner picture of history defines your reality. And if you think the Nazis won, then the Nazis won. If you think the US won, or the British won, or the Japanese won, or the Russians won, or nobody won, then that will be your reality. Thank you for listening. Keep reading of this I Ching analysis. I have the link below, but for some reason YouTube doesn't want me to have a link that where you can just click on it. They send me an email and said, you're not to have this right to have a click in the description, so you have to copy paste the link below. Have fun with the I Ching or with synchronicities. Bye bye.